Hey everyone. Okay, let's dive right into this explainer because today we are going to completely shift how you think about your past mistakes. We're exploring some absolutely fascinating concepts from Annie Duke's analysis on decision making. Specifically, we're looking at why our brains constantly trick us into regretting perfectly good choices. Trust me, if you have ever beaten yourself up over a decision that just didn't go your way, this is going to change your entire perspective.
Let's kick things off with literally one of the most debated moments in modern sports history. Picture this. It's the closing seconds of Super Bowl XLI. The Seattle Seahawks are trailing by 4 points, and they are right there on the New England Patriots' 1-yard line. Everyone, and I mean absolutely everyone watching, expected Seattle's coach, Pete Carroll, to call a running play for Marshawn Lynch. But instead, Carroll called a pass. And, well, that pass was intercepted. Game over. New England wins.
Well, the media immediately crucified him. The prevailing sentiment everywhere, from the Washington Post to Fox Sports to the Seattle Times, was that this was a historically terrible decision. They were calling it the worst play call in Super Bowl history. And why did they say that? Simply because the play didn't work.
But hold on. Imagine an alternate universe for a second. The exact same play call, but this time, the pass is caught for a game-winning touchdown. Suddenly, all those brutal headlines just disappear. Instead, Carroll would be hailed as an absolute genius, right? We'd be seeing headlines like "Carroll outsmarts Belichick." You see, he had complete control over the quality of his decision to pass, but he had zero control over the actual outcome.
And this whole scenario perfectly nails a concept that poker players call resulting. Resulting is this incredibly sneaky, dangerous mental trap where we completely ignore a logical, well-reasoned decision-making process just because we get a bad outcome. We tightly link the quality of our choice with how things turned out, which is a massive error in logic. Pete Carroll actually made a mathematically sound decision with a really high probability of success. He just suffered a highly unlikely, disastrous result.
To really prove how absurd resulting is, let's consider a pretty extreme example. Say someone drives drunk and somehow manages to get home safely without an accident. That is a good outcome, right? But does that good outcome mean driving drunk was a good decision? No way! Absolutely not. Surviving a drunk drive doesn't mean you should change your future behavior and go drive drunk more often. So why do we do this in business or sports or our personal lives?
Which brings us to Section 1, our need for certainty and the flawed brain.
So, you might be wondering, why on earth are our brains hardwired to make this exact logical error over and over again? Well, it basically comes down to evolution. Evolutionary survival required us to seek out patterns and certainty just to stay alive. Hear a rustle in the bushes, assume it's a lion, and run. Because of this, we essentially run on two operating systems. We've got a reflexive mind that is fast, automatic, and unconscious. This is what kept us alive on the savannah. And then we have the deliberative mind, which is slow, deliberate, and judicious. The problem is that deliberative part of the brain is tiny. It gets easily overtaxed, and it almost always loses the battle to our fast-acting reflexes.
It's kind of like the famous Mueller-Lyer illusion. Your brain automatically tells you the middle line is the longest one. But if you actually measure them, they're exactly the same length. And here is the real catch. Even knowing they're equal doesn't fix the visual trick. You can't just will your brain to unsee it. Similarly, just knowing about resulting doesn't mean you can will your brain to stop doing it. We need practical workarounds.
All right, moving on to Section 2, Game Theory, and why life is poker, not chess.
To figure out a workaround, we owe a massive revelation to John von Neumann. He's the genius who invented game theory. Von Neumann realized that real life, it is not like a game of chess. In chess, all the information is visible right there on the board. There are no hidden pieces, and there's almost zero luck involved. If you lose, it's because you made a mistake. But real life isn't chess. Real life is a lot more like poker. It is full of hidden information, deception, and just massive amounts of luck. You can do everything right in poker and in life and still lose simply because the cards didn't fall your way.
This leads us right into Section 3, the power of saying I'm not sure.
Because life is so much like poker, we really have to get comfortable with incomplete information. Imagine this coin flip thought experiment. Say someone walks up to you and says, "Hey, I flipped a coin and it landed heads 4 times in a row. How likely is that to occur?" If you just run the basic math, you'll probably say the answer is 6.25%. But that assumes we actually have all the facts.
What about the hidden variables? If we just blindly assume the math is flawless, we're basically falling into the exact same trap as the character Vizzini in the movie The Princess Bride when he engaged in that battle of wits and drank the poison. We act like we know everything, completely ignoring the massive amount of information we don't know. What if it's a trick coin? What if it's weighted? What if the person flipping it is literally a magician? We only have a tiny sample size of 4 flips.
But saying I don't know the answer makes us so uncomfortable. Society constantly trains us to crave certainty, right? We treat I don't know as some sort of failure of intelligence. The famous writer William Goldman once quoted a movie star who perfectly captured this societal flaw, saying, "I don't want to be the man who learns, I want to be the man who knows." And that's it, isn't it? We all just want to be the person who already has the answers.
So how do we build a better mindset? Well, we desperately need to reframe the phrase, "I'm not sure." We have to stop seeing it as a marker of ignorance. In reality, saying I'm not sure is a marker of intellectual honesty. It's a completely objective, accurate representation of a world that is inherently unpredictable. Making peace with not knowing is actually the very first step to making better, more objective decisions.
Okay, final section here, section 4, redefining being wrong.
This is where the real paradigm shift happens. We have to completely change what it means to be wrong. The source material shares this fantastic story about a pretty raucous charity poker tournament. The author was dealing the cards, and 2 players went all in, exposing their hands. The author announced to the crowd that one player had a 76% chance of winning, and the other had a 24% chance. Well, the last card was dealt, and wouldn't you know it, that exact player hit their lucky card and won the hand. Immediately, someone in the crowd yelled out, "You are wrong!" But here is the core logic you absolutely have to remember. 24% is not 0%. Unlikely events happen all the time. If you say something has a 24% chance of happening and it happens, you just got to see part of that 24%. It doesn't mean your initial probability or your decision was wrong. People routinely misunderstood this exact concept during the Brexit vote and the 2016 US election. Odds makers and pollsters gave the eventual winners a roughly 30% chance. When that 30% outcome actually happened, everyone claimed the predictions were completely wrong. But guys, 30% happens nearly 1/3 of the time. So the ultimate takeaway here is how we redefine wrong. We've got to separate luck from skill. We must evaluate our actual decision-making process rather than obsessing over the final outcome. We just have to embrace the fact that all of our decisions are really just probabilistic bets on an uncertain future. By adopting this poker mindset, we can finally stop beating ourselves up over bad outcomes that were largely out of our control anyway. I want to leave you with this one final provocative thought. Take a hard look at your own life and think about the last time you agonized over a quote-unquote bad decision. Ask yourself honestly, were you actually making a terrible choice given the information you had at the time, or did you just get a bad result? Are you just a victim of resulting? Think about that before you judge your next big bet. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.